At some point in the last week, you checked your work messages when you did not need to. Not because something was due, not because anyone asked, you checked because you could not fully settle into not checking. Because somewhere in the background, quietly and persistently, was the feeling that something might be happening that you were not part of. A decision being made without you, a conversation you were not in, an opportunity moving past while your phone sat face down on the table. This is not ambition. It is not dedication. It has a name. And the research around it explains something deeply uncomfortable about why modern work feels the way it does. Relentless, boundaryless, and never quite finished. FOMO, fear of missing out, was formally named in 2013 by researchers Andrew Przybylski, Ksenia Murayama, Caitlin DeHaan, and Valerie Gladwell in a paper published in the journal Computers and Human Behavior. They defined it as a pervasive apprehension that others might be having rewarding experiences from which one is absent, coupled with a desire to stay continually connected. Their study found it was strongly associated with lower mood, lower life satisfaction, and higher social media engagement. What they did not study, and what has only recently been examined, is what FOMO does in a professional context, not to your social life, to your work, because the professional version of FOMO is different in important ways. It is not about parties you were not invited to. It is about projects you might be cut out of, promotions decided in rooms you were not in, relationships built between colleagues while you were offline. The creeping sense that presence, any form of presence, is a form of currency, and that absence, however brief, is a form of poverty. Start with where FOMO comes from, because it did not originate with smartphones or open-plan offices. The threat detection system that produces it is ancient. For 300,000 years, humans lived in groups of roughly 25 to 150 people. Within those groups, social position was not just a matter of comfort, it was a matter of survival. Access to food, to mates, to protection, to the information that kept you alive, all of it ran through the social network. Being excluded from the group, or merely from the key conversations happening within it, was a genuine biological threat. The brain built a monitoring system to track social inclusion in real time. A system exquisitely sensitive to any signal that you might be on the outside of something important. That system is still running. In the modern workplace, it has simply found new material to process. The open Slack channel. The meeting you were not copied on. The team lunch where decisions were apparently made informally. The promotion that went to someone who the hiring manager had simply spent more time with. None of these are life or death situations. Your 300,000-year-old monitoring system cannot tell the difference. The neuroscience underneath this operates through uncertainty and dopamine, the same mechanism that drives compulsive scrolling. Dopamine does not fire for rewards. It fires for the possibility of rewards. An inbox that might contain something important produces a dopamine response every time you open it. A Slack channel where the next message might be the one that changes something for you produces a low-grade but continuous dopamine signal just by existing. The uncertainty is the engine, and the brain, in its endlessly efficient way, has learned that staying connected reduces the uncertainty. Each check is a small resolution. Each check is also a small reinforcement of the habit. The behavior self-perpetuates. Researcher Sherry Turkle at MIT spent years studying what she called the tethered self, the way that constant connectivity had changed people's relationship to their own attention and presence. What she found was that the people most attached to their devices were not necessarily the people who received the most important communications. They were the people with the highest underlying anxiety about social and professional exclusion. The device was not the cause. It was the coping mechanism. The FOMO came first. The checking came second. The productivity loss came third. In her research, Turkle also documented something she described as the hallowed multitasking myth. The widespread belief that being constantly available and constantly responsive was the same as being constantly productive. Workers who felt the most indispensable were often the most fragmented. Their attention was perpetually split across multiple communication channels, each one demanding just enough awareness to prevent full focus on any single thing. They felt busy. The output told a different story. and it is a productivity loss. A study by Gloria Mark at the University of California, Irvine found that after an interruption, including self-generated interruptions like checking messages, it takes an average of 23 minutes to return to the same level of focused attention. People who checked their messages frequently throughout the day were not working harder. They were paying a 23-minute tax every time they did it. The work that felt urgent enough to check for was rarely urgent enough to justify the cost of checking. Mark's research also found something that compounds this problem significantly. The longer a person worked in a high interruption environment, the more they began to interrupt themselves, even when no external notification had arrived. The brain, trained over months and years to expect the signal, began generating the checking impulse internally. People who had spent years in open-plan offices or high-notification digital workplaces had literally rewired their own attention patterns. The environment had restructured the habit from the outside in. But here is where the professional FOMO story becomes genuinely strange, because the research suggests that FOMO does not just affect how we work, it affects the kinds of work we say yes to. A 2021 study led by researchers at Columbia Business School found that people experiencing higher levels of professional FOMO were significantly more likely to take on additional projects, attend optional meetings, and volunteer for tasks that fell outside their core responsibilities. Not because they had capacity, not because the work was strategically important, but because they did not want to be the person who said no. The fear was not of the work itself. The fear was of what declining the work might signal, that they were not ambitious enough, not visible enough, not in the room enough. The result was a workload driven not by what was actually important, but by what felt threatening to miss. Busyness as a defensive strategy against exclusion. The calendar as a form of anxiety management. This is the mechanism underneath what many people experience as hustle culture, but which hustle culture framing misidentifies as ambition. Ambition has a direction. It moves towards something specific. What FOMO produces is motion without direction. The goal is not to achieve a particular outcome, but to never be visibly absent from the possibility of outcomes. These feel the same from the inside. They produce very different results over time. Ambition builds, FOMO accumulates, one compounds in your favor, the other compounds in the form of exhaustion, and a calendar full of things you agreed to from a place of fear. And here's the part that closes the loop uncomfortably. The modern workplace has been designed in many of its features to produce exactly this dynamic. Open communication channels with no boundaries. Notification systems calibrated to interrupt. Cultures where responsiveness is treated as a proxy for dedication. Performance review systems that reward visibility over output. Management structures where face time still correlates with advancement in ways that have no rational basis in the work being done. The people who built these systems may not have done so cynically, but the result is an environment that activates the ancient threat detection system continuously, produces compulsive checking through dopamine uncertainty loops, and rewards the performance of busyness over the production of actual work. In this environment, FOMO is not irrational. It is a logical response to a system that genuinely does, sometimes, reward presence and penalize absence. The monitoring system is not malfunctioning. It is reading the environment correctly, which is precisely what makes it so difficult to address with individual-level advice. Which makes it harder to solve than it first appears? The advice to simply log off, to set boundaries, to trust that nothing important will happen while you are away, underestimates what the nervous system is actually responding to. It is not wrong about the environment. It is just running a 300,000-year-old program on a problem that did not exist 300,000 years ago. What the research does suggest is that the fear of missing out is most disruptive when it operates unconsciously, when it drives behavior without being identified as a drive. People who can name what is happening, who can recognize the checking reflex as a fear response rather than a productivity strategy, show measurably better outcomes in studies on attention and well-being. Not because naming it eliminates it, because naming it creates the brief gap between impulse and action where a different choice becomes possible. The work email at 11 p.m. will probably be there in the morning. The meeting you were not copied on almost certainly did not decide your career. The Slack message that arrived while you were present with something else was unlikely to be the one that changed everything. Your brain believes otherwise. It has believed otherwise for 300,000 years, and it will check again in about 20 minutes, just to make sure. If this made you think there's a lot more where that came from, subscribe so you don't miss it.